The conversation you are about to hear is with a podcast host and video creator on a YouTube channel called Hermitix. James Ellis creates content on topics related to philosophy, spirituality, culture, technology, and the occult, reaching up to 100,000 downloads per month and ranking among the top 20 philosophy podcasts in over 10 countries. Though I had previously seen some of his content and I found it useful, I admit to having virtually no impression of his depth or personality going into this conversation. I'm delighted to say that this was a very high-level conversation. My co-host, Michael Downs, and James both really brought it together. I hope you will find this conversation as stimulating and thought-provoking as I did. If you're interested in courses at Theory Underground, getting involved, or supporting this work, please stick around until the end, give it a like, and all of that jazz. Now please, enjoy the show. All right, everybody, welcome to Theory Underground. I'm your host, Dave McKerracher. We're with Mikey, so you know what it is. But today we're joined by James Ellis. Welcome, man. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to talk about whatever it is we are going to be talking about.
Yeah. Mikey, what are we going to talk? Mikey, take it away. What are we going to talk about?
You gotta realize, I've been watching James's channel, Hermitix, for a long time. James also blogs under Meta Nomad. And anybody who's interested in accelerationism is going to know who James is and his blog, his channel. And so everybody knows at this point that I have a real strong interest in accelerationism, land, the whole trajectory there, right? And I've just wanted to talk to James for a long time. There's really no YouTube channel to me that really does what James's does. It's James is great about. You can learn Kant on James's channel, but you can also learn about land. You can learn about the occult. There's a lot of philosophers James does videos on that I've never even heard of. So that's another thing I really appreciate about his channel. So I want to talk to James about his work, his book, his zero accelerationism, land, the whole thing. So I think we can have a lot of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover.
I've got a big question, I guess, as well, and but I'll save it for later. I guess let's start with the relationship between the world of philosophy and theory and the world of the occult, since you kind of bridge these two things. And I think before we started recording, we were kind of getting into there is going to be this inevitable sort of oh my God, why are you talking to someone who's doing occult stuff? And I kind of want to hear both of your guys' thoughts about that antagonism and what you think it's based in.
Sure. Mind if I start, Mikey?
Please.
So with I want to pick up on what you said, something about that. You're talking to someone who's talking about the occult, right? That the kind of person you don't want to be stuck in a kitchen with at a party, right? They're wearing crystals or something. And you're like, oh man, that idea floats around of that's what the occult is. And the more you read about it, the more it becomes something completely different, and it just means hidden, and none of the names really, we have all these names floating around that, once again, I think if you heard them, if someone says, oh, I'm really spiritual, it's no, I don't know what to do. All the terms that describe that field, you don't really know what to do with them, right? Mystical, spiritual, whatever it might be. It's okay, well, they've all become kind of free floating and a bit useless. So I think with it, it's always good to knuckle down on what you mean. So that's one aspect of it. But to focus in on this notion of the overlap between occultism, whatever you want to call it, mysticism and philosophy, I basically think there is a one-to-one history parallel to philosophy that is, to say it's parallel is probably incorrect. I think it's intertwined, and the mystical side of things is taken out for ease, and also for the fact that we're still in the death throes of Enlightenment secular values that have they've only really just rooted, and now they're on their way to dying. And but examples of this would be, if you go back to quite literally the fathers of Western thought. So, I mean, if we were talking about someone like, who's the, I don't know, I need to make sure, yeah, Thales was the father of Western philosophy, right? I mean, and he's beginning with the elements and the very peculiar way of thinking about the elements, which has been passed down into like Western occultism. But of course, if we're going to go through to, I guess who we really would consider the father of Western philosophy, which is Plato, there's this whole hidden Egyptian angle of going off to Egypt to learn the secrets and bringing that back and having that intertwined in the work and all this lost work. Pythagoras with his mystical school. And then you could go through to so-called modern thinkers, someone like Descartes, and understand that Descartes had all this strange stuff with electrical spheres and electrical energy. And then through to the modern day, someone like Bergson, who is adjacent to Gurdjieff. I mean, and I think you would honestly be outside of the so-called diehard hardline, so-called dialectic of enlightenment, Adorno, Horkheimer, like that, everything that's nonsense. It's all dead, gone. Outside of that, I think you would be hard pressed to find a single philosopher who doesn't have some relationship with that other side of things. I mean, think of, Schopenhauer, right? He has the whole thing of telepathy hidden away and the veil of Maya, and it's a classic example, I guess. But I think one would be hard pressed. I think it's all there the whole time. And I think the problem is what we think of it, what we go in thinking about it, especially from a modern progressive worldview, that it's one of the most dangerous things I think that's happening in academia and scholarship today, is treating this whole idea of back then, they believed this. How they were so dumb, not like us, right? And which is a complete ignorance with respect to the fact that we're still in that history. So it's like, no, we're modern, so it's done. So this, I think a lot of damage is being done by this going in with an assumption. We're right, we've worked it all out, we've got reason, we've got mind, whatever it might be, and they were all wrong. And so we actually attend to these beliefs from that point of view. And we see this most recently in, it's a book, very, very new release about miracles in more recent times, the Saint Who Flew. But it's really addressing, I can't remember the name of the book, unfortunately, but it's addressing that notion of, well, we have to treat history. One of the things it's addressing, we have to treat history in that respect, that people did believe that in that time. So you have to attend to it, I think, from that point of view. But that's my opinion with regards to philosophy and so-called occultism, that it's one and one the whole way through. Yeah, I mean, there's a big question there of why we want to get rid of it, but yeah.
I guess what I would say is that, for one, I think there's an appeal to the occult now because it's still, there's so much transgression, especially academic transgression around it, where it's like, we don't, I mean, and look, the theory that we're into, I mean, there's still in America, you're lucky to find anybody teaching Baudrillard or Žižek or whatever at in a philosophy department. But so even on that level, a lot of the theory we are into is somewhat repressed. But then the occult stuff is another level. And so I think on the one hand, a lot of people who are burnt out with academia in its current form find anything that's, kept hush or repressed, etc. It's the basic psychoanalytic insight. Prohibition eroticizes. And so on that level, it's like, well, okay, I'm not allowed to, I can't quote Crowley in an academic article. So, now I want to know what Crowley's all about, right? And I think the same logic, whether it's Žižek or Baudrillard, just in a lesser form, is there. I think a lot of it is, I mean, let's be honest, the occult was kept secret for so long that I think more and more you have people who are popularizing it, like, is it Lon Milo Duquette, right? Who writes these more popular works on Thelema. And so I think as people get access to what it is, I mean, for me, look, I was raised a Christian fundamentalist during the Satanic Panic. My aunt was an evangelical. And so the worst thing in the world was anything the occult, right? Anything connected to it. And so for a long time, I didn't have any interest in it. And then anytime I was, introduced to it, it was like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my soul. Right. And then as I grew older, I just, again, didn't have any interest. And then CCRU, when I really started diving into CCRU, if you want to understand what they're doing, you got to get some occult context. Right. And, as I started exploring it, I felt like how I did when I got introduced to Marxism, where you're like, I've been lied to my whole life about what this is, And so, I mean, even with Crowley, with the Lima, it's like, okay, the whole point is to establish communion with your holy guardian angel. And, people will go, oh, well, you're trying to contact spirit. But I'm like, every single person I grew up with wants to have communion with the Holy Spirit. It's just an alternate form of spirituality that the official forms always repressed. But, look, I know you can talk about like what the grimoire of Pope Honorius, where you summon demons for really malicious intents or whatever. But the majority of the occult stuff I've read or I'm currently learning about really is just alternate forms of spirituality. And, I guess it's not as taboo once you learn about what's going on with a lot of it, as it was when, grew up in America during the satanic panic. So, and I think, look, again, with land, I mean, that the whole thing, his connection with it is, of course, the outside, which is the noumenal realm. And for him, it's not like Kant, where the noumenon is kind of this empty category. It's just the limit of epistemological criteria, whereas land has no problem making the outside really robust. While also, it's a weird thing, right, James, where he talks about it, but he also knows like you can't really talk about it. Like you can speculate on it in a sense, or you can tap into tendencies with it. You can traffic with it on some level, and that's why he likes Kabbalah, right? But yeah, I mean, I keep talking, but I think ultimately, the thing with the occult is that it's a form of trafficking with the outside, and I think anybody who finds their traditional forms of spirituality to be lacking or uninspired, I see why there's an appeal to the occult in that way.
There's a couple of big things there. I mean, one, I guess in a way, there's no way to prove this. This is an untenable assertion, but to mention someone you have on the show seemingly constantly, Žižek, in I believe it's first as tragedy, then as fast. He says then as fast. He says it may very well be that as Nietzsche says, God is dead in this sociological, we can consciously acknowledge this sense, but God is absolute. The Christian God, and from Nietzsche, the Christian God is absolutely not dead in your unconscious, right? So this notion that you mentioned of transgression, of the occult as a transgression, one could argue, well, why is it transgressive in the so-called hyper liberally progressive world where seemingly absolutely every transgression is almost permitted, bar a couple of ones that we probably never will broach, because what we'd have to do to say, broach, I don't know, we're getting close, but we don't even want to mention them. But to broach all these transgressions, well, hang on, we live in this so-called, very liberally emancipated world. Why would things still seem transgressive? And it seems to me that maybe you disagree. The most of the West, as a habit, the Christian ethics has completely solidified, and we're a long way off. If one's goal is to shed that like some sort of archaic skin, we're a long way off doing that, because it has been within our cultural personality, just a very quick approximation of what it is, for so long that it's like an old habit. And so we see this in many occult practices that I don't want to say that, I don't want to speak for everyone and say that Christianity is the objective truth and everything's based on that, but the culture and ethics that came from Christianity, so many other things ended up being based on that even though that we're to shorten what I'm trying to say here, even though we are seemingly trying to transgress things, I don't see we've made any, if that's your goal, and not much headway at all. So occultism as this transgression, it just still seems to fall into almost the same streamlined thing. It's like the unconscious God that Žižek is talking about is constantly still like holding onto one's feet as they're trying to get away. And what you're talking about with the outside coming in, this sort of trafficking, I think just to begin on, I guess one thing to throw in on the land discussion and a criticism. Yeah, I've become more critical of land, and we can definitely get into why. I mean, there's plenty of reasons why, and I'm almost signed off on especially modern land, unless one wanted to put their MAGA hat on, in which case then we go support land. But the outside coming in, this notion of the outside coming in and trafficking with it, I think land's biggest sort of aesthetic oversight with this is whenever he mentions the outside, there's this like, oh, get ready for it's going to be the most horrible of horrors, Lovecraft, Cthulhu, Kenneth Grant, like the night side and the darkness is coming in. And I think many writers who've been influenced by land since then, I mean, most recently with the Acute Accelerationism book, have made this point of, well, if the outside that we're trafficking with is so inhuman and so like, Lovecraftian, we can't understand it, then I think the fair criticism of land is to say that how can you actually say that it is this horrifying, horrible thing? I mean, what even would that even mean? Why does it have that horrifying relationship to us? And so, lots of other stuff can come in from the outside. And I think land maybe has moved away from the horror side of things a bit with that. I don't want to speak for him, but in that recent interview of his, he mentions that, the Western canon, as this, the Western canon of literature and philosophy, I guess, as this sort of list that has been selected throughout time as an intelligence growing. I mean, within that is stuff, there's a lot that isn't horror. So, I think for a long time the outside was sort of constrained in this sort of horrifying sense that is a bit ridiculous, to be honest. But I think the difference there, maybe the transgression is an acceptance of some sort of gnosis as opposed to just pure faith. There's a sort of dark gnosis of land that you probably got, Mikey, from when you're reading the CCRU. You're like, oh, there's a certain feeling here, that certain feeling of wrongness or something like that that completely doesn't belong in philosophy, but is very difficult to describe.
Well, it's like in the piece, Who's Pulling Your Strings, right? Where there's this character, and I'm sure I was never sure CCRU was intending this, but she's basically like, they abducted me and drugged me and performed satanic rituals and whatever, however it goes. And then they switch back to their own voice and they're just like, we never knew this person. Like, but they certainly played with that. And I mean, look, one of the things when I was talking to Žižek, and because Žižek, he's totally open to having a debate, discussion, whatever, with land. And, Slavoj says he never had really heard of land before I told him about him. But I don't know. He went and quickly wrote that article on land for Compact after our discussion. And so, look, we'd love to have these two come on to talk. And, it's balls in land's court at this point. But one of the things I get criticism from at least certain Landians is they say, oh, you present him like he's the mean version, which is he's like the dark overlord who wants to bring about human extinction, blah, blah, blah. And, there's points in his work where I'm like, no, that I think I could defend that with certain quotes from Thirst for Annihilation and Fang Numina. I think he moved away from that. I mean, in the, what is it? It's a 97 or interview where he basically is a suppression of oppression or whatever. I'm drawing a blank on the name. Anyway, there's a point where he's just like, look, total collapse of the social order isn't going to work as a politics. Like, it dawned on him at some point where it's like, okay, if I want to have any sort of accelerationist politics, this whole thing of like complete breakdown of society is not the way to, you're not going to win over soccer moms with that. And so, I think that's why Yarvin or Mulbug and this whole thing with the soft pork and neo-cameralism, it gave them a different form of politics to experiment with, think about. And, okay, so since it's so capital oriented, you're still letting the outside in, But I don't know. I've had issues with this. I think it's still it violates the basic form of accelerationism, which is you can have a stable society where there's security and preservation of well-being, while capital is just free to do whatever it wants. And I don't know. I just feel like this. I don't see this vision working out the way he thinks. But ultimately, no. I think you're right about different idea or different things possibly coming in from the outside that aren't just Cthulhuoid, nightmarish, Lovecraftian thing. Dave and I mean, that's part of where we're coming from with politics. But we can talk about that in a little bit. But,
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, got anything?
Yeah, I guess on the first question, I want to answer it as well because I've been into philosophy for, I would say, since 2013, probably. I became aware of it about a year prior to that. And before that, I was just a regular working class kind of guy. I liked music. I'd just go to a lot of concerts. I'd drink. And as I got into psychedelics during I would say like the last few years of that phase of my life, I was really getting into big ideas. That's what I characterize it as now, as opposed to rigorous and critical thinking, which is what I'm more into now. I liked a couple big ideas with rigorous and critical thinking, but what I guess the bad taste I had in my mouth for mysticism, occultism, spirituality, it was a self-critique, and perhaps I was projecting onto other people my own experience. But basically, when people say you open up your mind too much and your brains fall out, that's essentially what happened in that phase. Like I got super into it. If you watch the Midnight Gospel show, which I'm sure it's like that was my inner monologue. And that was the kind of conversations I was having with people. It was just like all the time. And so, eventually that I burnt out on all that and I felt embarrassed actually and wanted to get more serious about my thinking. And then when I got into philosophy, I was like, oh, there's a tradition here of people who've been trying to not just think about whatever they fancy or whatever sounds good, they're self-critical and, and also maybe even of the society and its common sense. And so, getting into philosophy, then I realized, people often misrecognize me and what I'm into for the UFO and crystal side of the bookshelf. That in the United States, it's almost always the same fucking bookshelf. It's like you see Plato and you see like Rand and Rawls, and it's just kind of like it's just all this. It's this mixture of like little bits and pieces of philosophy, but you're missing not just great texts, but like the ones that are on the bookends of those great texts, and like like the au revoirs of those actual workers, the overs, I guess is how you say that, of these actual authors. Like you don't see that. I just actually retweeted you where it's like, you see a great text, but you don't realize that that's a thinker who had a whole life and had all these other works. And so, not only are we being separated from that, but then we're also being set right beside like these pop, 3 a.m. radio station kind of authors. And it's like, well, so I think people want to distinguish themselves and differentiate themselves because they're tired of the misrecognition. But I'm becoming increasingly more open-minded to all this because I don't think that prohibition is good. Like this sort of like, oh, we don't do that. We don't traffic with that. I don't like it. And I think that ultimately, whatever I've seen from your channel at this point, maybe like 4 videos, is awesome. And the guy who I met at my work, who first started telling me about your content, shout out to Mike, not this Mikey, but like the guy who's telling me about your stuff, man, was like, he's just really, really into ideas and, serious, like logical thinking. And I was like, this Ellis guy sounds really cool. And then I was like, oh, that's the guy that Mikey's been talking about this whole time. So like there was this connection where it's like Mike and Mikey both talking about you to me. And so I was like, all right, things are syncing up. We got to have this conversation. But I guess I want to ask you about, because you just referenced Žižek, said that he's like seemingly always on the channel. I mean, a couple times, but we recycle the stuff from the times that he's been here. Very nice. Yeah. But going back to Mike and what he was telling me about your work, it's what I think is really interesting is time and energy. And, because my work is all about time energy, and which is, defined as large energy infused repeatable blocks of time. And if you don't have large energy infused repeatable blocks of time throughout your week, you really can't do much. And most people can't because they're working. And most philosophers have thought about time, but because they presuppose energy, they don't really think about energy too much. But you do get that from psychoanalysis. And what I think is so interesting about your work is that you draw from Jung and Reich and Claugus and all these other guys that aren't Lacan, that aren't Freud, and you're thinking about energy, and so maybe you do draw from Freud. I don't know. I want to let you speak for yourself and just kind of set up how you are approaching. I don't know if you call it libidinal energy or you call it, human energy, or what is your approach here to thinking about the human and how we get motivated or inspired about things, That's kind of where I'm coming from.
I think motivation and inspiration. I mean, this is sort of relating to the outside. I think it's a matter of openness. Both, you could probably take the etymology of openness and spiral it out into many different words, like honesty and sincerity. But being open, and I mean that in a physical and a mental way. But like you said, with opening your mind too much, you have to like it sort of recursive. You have to be ready for your mind to be open that much, right? So if you go take a load of drugs, and then too much comes in, you just end up fried, and it doesn't really work. But with regard, I mean, just to read it back to the real how I think about things, what I've tried to move away from at all points, as much as I can, though, I think as human beings, we like to do this. We like to quickly fall into what's comfortable as quickly as we can because it just makes things easier. I've tried to move away from sympathy for single idea thinkers. So it's like, as much as I love Reich and Wilhelm Reich, and as much as I love his work, he would say, you were late for work. He might not go this far, but just to give an example, he might say, you've been late for work 15 minutes every single week, right? There's going to be some bodily armor that relates to, like maybe in your ankles, that's slowing you down and stopping you being late for work. Whereas I'd be like, okay, I think there's context for everything. So be like, hang on, maybe you need to just wind your clock back 15 minutes and then you'll be there on time, right? Like just take it for that context and we'll be fine. So with Freud, it's like, one of my two huge problems with Freud, one is, I've read a fair amount of Freud now. My first big problem is like, here's psychoanalysis that's, as far as I'm concerned, is meant to help people get better, or it's meant to help you have a life where you're not being what you could be is not being ruined by what he might call neuroticism, right? I think that's a fair assessment of what psychoanalysis is meant to achieve. But when I read Royd, there you go, roiding up. He's right. He was right all along. When I read Freud's case studies, right, it's like the Rat Man, right? And I'm like, what about someone who's just got anxiety, right? What about someone who's just a bit depressed? So all of these cases that he analyzes, I'm like, this is so far away from what maybe like 95% of people who are going to be able to utilize this. Along with the whole, like, it was very upper middle class. And And my other criticism is a fairly basic one. I just think the diagnoses are extreme, right? So like diagnoses coming down to like, you want to cut your dick off or you want to fuck your parents or whatever. It's like, well, come on, man. Like, so like with most things, take what works, move forward and use it all in different contexts. So like with Reich, the problem is, maybe I've just had a bad day and I don't need to get under the all-going blanket. And there's always times for different things. So moving away from this is because the problem is once you have that mindset of, I'm a Reichian, therefore this has something to do with body armor, you're sort of like, all you're going to end up doing is just walking down the wrong path for that thing. There's probably other examples I can think of there, but there's nothing more. Lacanians is another example of this absolutely must have something to do with the words that you're speaking, right? But there's 100 other facets to human existence, the body being one, right? So you end up like, you see this with Lacanians a lot. It's like you end up just drilling into language and it ends up sounding just like, whoa, you're getting lost in, we need to go into the etymology of the fact you used, I don't know, the word roid earlier, right? And it's like, roid, that rhymes with void, your soul, it's like, what, and I see this a lot. And, if you mentioned Jung as well, right? I would say this is probably one of my biggest frustrations with Jung that I spoke about in my Catafalque review is he is absolutely drunk on symbols to the point of like, dude, there was a snake in your dream, which has to do with the archetype of the Ouroboros. You feel your life's going in circles. It's like, you just pulled that out of your ass. Like when I read Jung, I'm like, unless that has some relationship with that person's conscious life, it seems to me like you're pulling meaning out, and then of course that person is going to be craving meaning, so they'll go, yeah, of course. And I can't remember what the name for that is in therapy, where the thing that is given by the therapist because they're in the point of authority is then believed, etc., etc. So yeah, my whole point with that is moving away from like, right, I have the core, this has to do with X thing. I think it's a very dangerous way to think. It's a very cliche, simple thing to say, though.
I just want to throw in have you read Lloyd de Moss by any chance?
I haven't, no.
So he wrote the evolution of childhood and the history of childhood and the psychic life of nations and all these different books that are basically, his big idea is that, how a nation tends to treat its children has really big ramifications for the adults that it produces. And so, he'll look at, for instance, Hitler's generation, right? And so, all this crazy stuff, like they were putting, the baby's crying too much, so put it on a pan and put it in the oven until it stops, and then you bring it back out. And it's like, or like putting them on a bunch of tacks to keep the demons at bay, and like just weird things that were being done to Hitler's generation. And it's like, okay, interesting. Well, so he's got interesting sort of anthropological stuff that I guess, he wouldn't be cherry picking this stuff from history if it wasn't for the fact that people are like doing this sort of culturally relativist, like, oh, everyone's good except for the West. And so, of course, he goes and he's like, well, the West is awful, but you want to talk about everyone else? They're also terrible to kids, and everyone's been awful to children. And so he's kind of like, only recently did we get this idea that like the child is a protected category. And that's actually like, it's important that we educate people on. So, okay. All of that's just to say, I think that that's all important work. I think it's very interesting, but his worst moments are his Jungianism. It ties directly back to what you're talking about. Like when he's talking about the psychic life of nations in that book, he talks about the red on the flag, well, see, that's like blood. And see, that's like in the womb, like you've got this relation to the mother and everything's red. And it's just like, dude, why don't you just stick to the stuff you're doing? Why do you have to bring that in? Why do you do that? You ruin everything with this, this sort of free associational, like, oh, I know what this is the symbol for. No, you don't,
God, I completely agree. And Jung does that all the time.
So you like these guys though, also. Yeah.
Yeah, like I like them, and then I think it's just a sign of maturity where you can sign off and say, "Yeah, like here is your good stuff," and then I'm going to use that, and I'm going to. There's plenty of right that I really disagree with. Some that that I like. Whoa, we don't. That's just. But at the same time, getting rid of armor and body therapy is like extremely effective. So you can say, oh, that works. I'll take that, and then we'll move forward and just keep moving, taking what works. Basically, I mean, we seem to push back against this idea of why not just focus on what works. I mean, maybe I'm too pragmatic. But I just before we go forward, I did want to mention something about the canon, and because you said about the philosophy section in bookshops, and it's the same in the UK. I mean, I don't really go to like big name. We have Waterstones, which is our big one here. But the last few times I went, I don't really go to them too often, really. The last few times I went have been the same experience. But I think, I wonder if the experience is the same because I'm not that well versed in history books, for instance, or I hate gardening, right? So I wouldn't know about gardening. I loathe gardening, right? Analyze that. But I wonder if the people who are into gardening, they go, this doesn't make any sense. Why have you got that book on, I don't know, cultivating garlic right? Because when I see the philosophy section, as someone who's read a lot of philosophy, and I'm going to sound like a complete gatekeeper, which I am in many things, and I don't really care. But like, for instance, right, it's like Chiron is there. Chiron's Trouble Being Born. And it's like, okay, maybe it sells because of the title, like I don't really know why it's there. And then it's like there's always Camus, the outsider. And you don't want to be an ass about it, but it's sort of like that is always in the middle of you're always in the middle of a discussion with philosophy. So you get these books, and a friend of mine once, she got really into she got into reading as a hobby, and she was like, oh, I wanted to start reading like more complex stuff, and she read The Outsider, which I was like really happy she read The Outsider. And I was like, oh, what do you think about it? And she said, well, this guy, I mean, he basically just thought that his mother had a good life, she died, so it didn't matter. I was like, all right, well, and I'm not trying to be mean, but it made me realize, like, what is it about this canonization process of, there's two ways that things are mostly canonized today. One is book covers, right? Bloomsbury, they canonize things because they go, you're in the nice color set. Churchill's in that. Who's really like, is Churchill's book really that important? Right? And there's also the Cambridge political theorist one with the blue, right? That's the canon. Why? Because they're the ones that got the cover that we all recognize. And the other canon is what's put on the shelves in the shops. And usually what's put on the shelves in the shops for people who have studied it is like, this just doesn't make any sense. But like Ayn Rand is still like that's just awful. Like it's not even remotely good. Yeah.
To me, I think, and part of it is like, I think it's more interesting for a philosopher to kind of put together their own canon, so to speak, which is, it's funny. I bring this from Good Will Hunting, but there's a scene where he's like, well, who do you read? And Matt Damon basically says, read whatever blows your mind, whatever. And, he essentially saying, read those thinkers that get you to think. Right? And, I think that's what Land did essentially with libidinal materialist tradition, where he's like, okay, Kant, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Bataille, D&G, right? Like he found something like a main nerve that nobody had really connected between them, and it inspired him to develop something original out of it. And so I think that's a far more interesting way to build, which isn't really a canon, right? But if you find those thinkers that really resonate with you despite their differences, and you can find a main nerve or main nerves in them and develop them out, you can really dig out something original there.
I mean, the land canon is, sorry. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the land canon is like, it's pretty, well, I just to stay on the land line with regard to this notion of having your like mind blown, and suddenly like those really original works that you're like, it just doesn't connect to anything else you read, and you're like, whoa, okay, Like I really actually got to sit. I'm like, you go back 5 pages because I need to. And so this notion for me, I think of capitalism as an intelligence was probably the biggest one of those in my life, actually, to like all the cogs turning in the sense of what an intelligence could be and then reframing it, because I just hadn't had. Marx never did it for me because the people who were Marxists were just, I was like, I do not want to be living the life you're living. So Marx never did it for me. And I think in terms of politics, whenever I saw leftist, rightist politics, even though I had a flirtation with the right for a little bit, it's like, this is going nowhere. And so, but then there was also the question, this is going nowhere, and yet something is carrying us forward, despite the fact that as human beings, rationally, we say, learn the lessons of history, which ironically means we've never learned the lessons, of course, right? Because that's all we do. So which means there's nothing new under the sun, and yet we're moving, and yet something is moving and something is changing. And so this notion of, I think, maybe if we put land historically, the human disappearing, and for what is it, Das Kapital Volume 3, the vampire, the vampiric capitalism entering somewhere and having, puppet strings. That was like, man, I'm going to sit up till 3 a.m. trying to figure out what the hell's going on.
And I love that you said that, James, because I think this is, when people go, oh, well, you make land into this maniacal guy going, oh, it's all going according to plan, right? But the point is, people forget how indebted land is to Marx's initial conceptualization of capital. Like, if you were to ask Land, hey, you think it's a complete waste of time to read Marx? He'd go, you're out of your fucking mind. In the typical, everyday type of conservative in America, for example, they think there's nothing more pointless than reading Marx. And this is where Land, which is,
well, Land always said that the best stuff was in Capital Volume 3. So you got to get there first. That takes some doing, right?
Right, yeah. but that's the thing, right? Marx was the first to liken capital to a vampire, to a werewolf, right? Which you can say kind of foreshadows the outside, right? It's this kind of monstrous entity that is, one, it's structural, right? I don't know if I buy Althusser's whole thing with the epistemological break, but the point of Marx in Das Kapital emphasizing that this is an overarching structure or system, that we're not at least prior to a working class revolution, we're not doing anything to really combat or challenge. That's his whole point, is trying to figure out a way, can we even do anything to this system? And so I don't know, I just see these being aspects that really influence Land also. And the whole libidinal materialist thing that he's doing in Thirst for Annihilation, Marx really isn't put in there, but because Marx really doesn't so much focus on anything like Schopenhauerian will or Nietzschean will to power, something like that. But I think if we think of capital as a will or a drive, because Marx even talks about it like that, Marx would be in that tradition as well. How we interpret him. What do you think of that?
Oh, you turned that into a question for James, didn't you? So
go ahead, Dave. I'm all good.
No, it's actually, now we would be going back to something earlier. So what do you think about that? Yeah.
All right. Well, for acceleration for me, my thesis, my master's thesis on accelerationism, capitalism as critique, changed that trajectory, implemented it within the Deleuzian spiral from difference and repetition, so that at each what Deleuze calls a break or a caesura, if you imagine a spiral, if humans were just left up to it and we didn't have this intelligence that is capitalism, it would just be a circle that goes on forever, which I guess there's relationships to Nietzsche in that as well. But then Deleuze comes in and says there's these breaks, there's something that's happened. We can't really say what's happening in these breaks. He can't. And there's a tightening of the spiral. And my theorization was that spiral is the Landian capitalism, which is intelligence building itself from the future. And as the spiral titans, the intelligence, which is the M. I see it because it's right in my mind because it's on your whiteboard. It's like a Jungian symbol searing in from the whiteboard. The MCM, right? But I think I was thinking about it. I mean, was it money, commodity, money, or money, capital, money?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really for land. That's just, you could just say that's just I, right? Intelligence, intelligence, because it's all the same thing. And not to be too pretentious here, but you got M-C-M. The dashes are more important because that's the point where it's refactoring or reterritorializing the two sides of the argument into something that is more capitalism-y, which doesn't make sense to us. And this is where, for me, zero accelerationism comes in, because I don't think the question of either consciousness or intelligence has been sufficiently answered to be able to say, because the ultimate question from if a spiral is tightening and the function that tightens the spiral is intelligence, anyone would ask, well, what's the point? Like, what? And so, and people who have smoked too much weed would say it's a singularity, and no one can really expand on what the hell the singularity, like, it's when intelligence, like, just knows itself. Great. Glad we figured that. Like, glad we figured that out. Right? And so, for me, it's like, it sucks, but Land's whole thing is like, humans suck and we're going to be gone. Like, yeah, we suck so much that I think as the primary fuel for capitalism, as its engines of intelligence, as its engines which allow this intelligence to make any sense at all, we're just a constant stone in its shoe, because we have emotion, and the targets unto which the machinations of capitalism are targeted are completely, as far as I can see, are completely at the whims of what capitalism, if it was the anthropomorphized intelligence we imagine it to be, completely at the whims of our emotional oversight. Like, does this Landian intelligence building itself in the future really want to expend that much finite energy right now on Funko Pops? Like, is that a decision that it would like the machinic unconscious, wants, I don't know, me to buy another book that I won't read, that, so for me, that's where zero accelerationism comes in, is the oversight is huge. Like, capitalism is using apes as its fuel. And also, I mean, this whole idea of AGI, as far as I'm concerned, it seems that an AGI is still all modeled around our own understanding of our own intelligence. Chess AI will just play chess. A packing AI will just pack things. And within those confines, it's not going to go outside of them. An artificial general intelligence supposedly will be able to, like, learn, but it seems that it's almost like we've built an intelligence and we've implemented it within the exact same Kantian spatiotemporal limiting framework that we have. It uses arms, and it has visualization, and it has quantification in its mind, right? It still has all the same functionality. So in a Landian sense, I'm pessimistic, because I just think it gets to this point and you say, well, but what do you even mean past that point? If Land, I think at one point said that the ultimate future is like basically a robot self-reproducing in space forever, like an inhuman Landian paperclip generator, right? And it's like, it sucks. They're like, not even in a human way. It's just like, I don't think it does the Landian thing very well, because all that would really mean is at some point someone said, you need to self-replicate. But that's still a completely anthropomorphized desire.
And isn't there this, I mean, look, because one of the things I want to talk to you about at some point is just cybernetics versus dialectics. I think this is a interesting distinction here, but there's this, like, dialectics in the way that I understand it with Žižek, right? I would say to Nick, like, okay, this whole thing of just an intelligence constantly recoding itself recursively to just further its own intelligence. I want to go, yeah, but it's completely a static state if you look at it just with a tiny shift in perspective, which is that's all it's doing. It's totally territorialized. It's territorialized on deterritorialization itself. But the point is, that form of deterritorialization remains constantly steady, constantly stable. And so it's in a weird sense, it's like it's not going anywhere. It's not, there's no abrupt changes. There's no like you're saying, like, okay, so one can play chess and the other one could, at an Amazon facility, it could sort packages, but it's not going to go through an existential crisis and go, my real calling is to be a ballerina, right? Like it's,
No.
or whatever. But no, it's just, I guess that's the thing, but I don't know. I guess with Land, like at this point, I'm not even sure where he's at on things. I mean, there's, okay, people say he got locked out of his outsideness account and that there's a new account, but I also have heard people say that the new account's bogus. It's not really him. Do you know anything about this on Twitter?
I think in my in my sort of like, no, I have no idea about the truth of any of this. I have no idea about this, right? What I would say for people who are wondering about that is Land is known to take really long breaks from Twitter because in a sort of ironic twist, and I don't mean this like pessimistically, it's kind of a nice ending, maybe, because I don't know how interested he really is in philosophizing. I mean, the Bitcoin book is still whatever. I mean, I don't want to say I don't know about his life, but I think he's probably just on holiday. Like, unironically, I think he's just on holiday. I mean, the last thing I remember is he was saying, like, yeah, no, he travels a lot with his family. So I think he's probably, people are like, he's made another account and he's, like blasting off to the lemurs again. It's like, no, I think it's just a man enjoying time with his family, which is probably not what people want to hear. But I think that's probably the truth of the matter.
Yeah. And that's my thing is like, I think at this point, it's like, I'm not even sure what he would say about, this old concept of the singularity, if he still maintains it, I don't know. And so, yeah. And then because the Bitcoin book, he never, I mean, we've got, we've got part of it, or at least a rough draft of it. Right. Which I know you said at one point in an interview or something I saw of yours, you think that's going to ultimately be his magnum opus.
Well, I thought it would be. I mean, I did the talks on it, and it was an incredible book in terms of this notion of really doing something extremely original with the transcendental.
Yeah, I agree.
And changing our relationship, like not phenomenological. I don't want to. It's been a while since I've really delved into it. I mean, but it was, yeah, absolutely, it was going to be his magnum opus. But the end of it was like, man, it was a tough task to wrap that. I mean, it was 2 more sections, I think, if I'm remembering right. Yeah.
Didn't he say in I think it was in his interview with you where he was just like, the last part on economics is so taxing that.
Yeah. That was 6 years ago.
Right. Okay. Just on a side note, because I'll just forget. Okay. At the beginning of that, or somewhere near the beginning, he mentions this thing, Mao likens capital to a field of mushrooms that you I have never been able to find this quote. Nobody I know who reads Mao can find it. I just was curious if you've ever come across the quote he was referencing.
Well, my mind immediately thinks that perhaps it's, and this is completely just intuitive in the sense of to do with mushrooms. If it's Mao thinks that capitalism is a mushroom field and they pop up randomly, my assumption would be that actually that's something that is coming from Deleuze and Guattari because of the rhizomatic structure of mycelium. Yeah. I don't know if I would even agree with that because I don't really see this. I don't know. Does it well? But I would say that I've never read Mao or,
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up.
Like,
go ahead.
Like if Mao did say that, it's like, you mean people wanting to do their own thing and not fucking walk in lockstep with your idea, that keeps popping up like a mushroom, which is kind of like saying people don't bend to my will, which is also kind of like saying it's like whack-a-mole, like the game you play at like Chuck E. Cheese as a kid, the mole pops up and you whack it with the hammer, and then it pops up over here and you whack it with the hammer. It's just a dark analogy to me, because it's like, because everything that we don't like is capitalism, everything we don't like is bourgeois, everything we don't like is metaphysics. It's like, that's what you get from this kind of ideology. And it's like, yeah, you mean people don't want to fit in your box. Like, this is Levinasian infinity that you're talking about. Like, oh, people are going to overflow like what I want them to do. So anyway, Mikey, you end up doing something with that in the book, right? Like your forthcoming book, don't you?
On what, the mushroom thing?
Yeah, you have something else.
No,
Like,
about what the Mary Wollstonecraft. I found a quote of hers where she likens capital to like, well, okay, in what is it, post-war era, she likens those mushroom capitalists whose fortunes just mushroom.
oh, okay.
So, but it's a different kind of thing.
Different kind of mushroom.
Yeah, but James, one thing I did want to ask you from that you mentioned in Pat, like, so yeah, when you were talking to Land, one of the things he says is like capital is just doing anything in a way that augments it, makes it more efficient, etc. And I don't know. I think Dave and we've talked about it where it's like, yeah, I don't think capital is just synonymous with a positive feedback loop. I mean, there's wage labor involved, there's commodification involved, there's a value form involved. And so I don't know if I want to just identify capital itself with positive feedback process.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I'm with you. I'm with you. That's what I was saying earlier. I think this hyperplasticity, which is brought to us from Deleuze and Guattari, of like how plastic capitalism is. I mean, it's what I was talking about earlier with this idea of people have their one idea, right? There's nothing worse than someone who has one idea. And you're talking about cheese sandwiches, and they're like, oh, yeah, that reminds me of Wilhelm Reich. Like, not every. So the guy who can't stop talking about World War II or something. Come on, man, we're just trying to chill out. And Deleuze and Guattari are like this, right? It's like you have this. I mean, and they have the ultimate plastic, right? Because it's so plastic, it can literally be anything, which to me is like, well, if it can be absolutely everything, we've kind of got nothing to work with. And they just about managed to do it. It's like the thing analogy that Land gives, that you never really see the real force that's behind capitalism. But I would be in agreement with you that, well, whether or not Land wants to admit it, and whatever way you come at it from, and I would, I guess many people would state that the three major schools of economics are Marxist, Keynesian, and Austrian, roughly speaking. And I would tend to come at it personally just from the Austrian side, but I think all three of those have these factors of, for Marxists, you have labor. So you have labor time, and the value is coming from labor, which is human beings utilizing their finite time within a certain contexts. With Austrians, it would be subjective tables of subjective preference, which is, once again, human beings with bodies that have personalized individual desires. For Keynesians, it would be being completely nonsensical and illogical about everything. But anyway, you didn't like my joke. There was a Keynes joke about it being absolute crap. Yeah, thank you. No, what would it be for Keynesians? Just keep printing money until things work?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that every major school of economics has an idea of capitalism. None of them are could process or
just
truck with
with
this.
With respect to accelerationism, my point would be with it, Land is like you're saying, Land is attending to capitalism from this almost like a future point of view, where human beings, Marx for Marx, labor time for Austrians, desire, which are emphatically human things. Land is attending to capitalism, which has become, another name for accelerationism was capitalism-ism. He's attending to that some future point where somehow humanity had been removed from the picture, which is like, I don't want to. That's entering into the realm of science fiction. And as far as I'm concerned, it's like these things just haven't gone. Your Marxist labor time is still absolutely a factor in this. Desire is still a factor in this. So that's where zero accelerationism comes from. Is before you have your great big blast off into the automated inhuman skies, humans are just going to ruin things because
just going to collapse, right?
Yeah, because I mean, it's the old cliche of you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet, and all the answers. So the libertarian answers to that are they will think of something, right? There will be some magical alternative to fuel, and maybe the left wing answers is some. If your politics are now heavily engaged with climate policy as the primary thing, then you could say that green energy is going to suddenly miraculously be able to equate for the energy in petroleum, which is not even close to doing. So ultimately, it's a really boring thing that humans are suck at admitting to, which is we have limits. And if we'd been sensible about them and admitted to them first and said, oh man, this is going to suck actually, but we actually have to move all our energy from here, which is kind of fun, into this, so that we're not very good at doing that. We're not very good at delaying gratification, so it's too late to do that. Yeah, I just, all the things that would make this Landian sci-fi future possible, they're gone. They're long gone. And as far as I'm empirically aware, they're reliant on petroleum stores that are long gone. But I don't want to go too deep into the, this is just how it is.
Yeah, I think I just feel like it's gonna be like asteroid mining or something. It's like, well, I would kind of like if it wasn't true, but it's like, yeah, the infinite growth on a finite planet, yeah, sure, but we're in an infinite universe, or at least functionally infinite universe. And so the question, I mean, for me, it's like I figure I think the plausible future, and I'm writing about this in one of our forthcoming volumes.
Asteroid mining.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
All right. No, I don't like.
I mean, I don't know.
When I start talking about limitations, it comes across as if I really don't want it, and I want to go back, and I want to live. I want to be sat with a lute around a campfire, listening to Jethro Tull or something, right? Like I don't want that, right? I'm not a Luddite. I like technology. I think so much of it is good. I'm not huge on cars. I think there might be some alternatives there, but I like technology, right? I like going to the dentist, they inject me with something so I don't have to feel it, right? I'm not a Luddite. But at the same time, it's just like, okay, the empirical reality is like, you look at the one time we got to the moon just to go there and grab a couple of rocks and come back. That was an absolute economic anomaly during that era. And the amount of the budget in the most powerful country that had ever been, and the most economically prosperous country there had ever been, and probably will ever be, like at the absolute peak of economic anomaly, used something like 50% of its budget. That could be wrong, but it used an enormous amount of its budget just for that. Now, you could say, look what happens when you privatize it. That's the Landian dream right now with Elon Musk. He's doing pretty damn well with what he has, and I'm not against it. When I see the rockets go up and land, I'm not going to lie, I get shivers, because I'm like, this is pretty damn incredible. But there's a big difference between firing a rocket up and down all day 100 times a year, I think is the average that he's doing right now, and it is impressive, and I want to see it. But also, it's a big difference between that and landing on an asteroid and bringing it, right? There's like just a factor of 10. Well, and the question is energy. Where's the energy?
I know they want to do like the 3D printing on the moon, so the moon's own material to build housing and facilities, etc. And
great, cool. Like, I'm so for it, right? But it's very much when I see it.
No, and that's so. I've got a friend who is he's a computer programmer, and he's really tapped into everything going on with tech. And whenever he and I have our discussions about land, he just is like, land to me just comes off as a techno fetishist. He goes, I'm sorry, like those of us who work in tech just know that this stuff's not around the corner. We're not talking 10 years, 20 years. He goes, if we're talking 300 years from now, 400 years from now, maybe. He's like, but the problem is when we factor in climate change, when we factor in the economic crisis globally, he goes, I think the issue is, how do we prolong ourselves long enough to get that far out where the Landian future would emerge? He goes, I'm telling you right now, he goes, there is nothing like the techno capital singularity on the immediate horizon.
No.
He goes, I know that ChatGPT is really impressive, and you can do great. He goes, that is not the singularity. It's nothing like
no.
And he goes, look, again, 500 years from now, he goes, maybe the singularity is a real act. He's like, I can buy that. But he goes, I think our big issue, and I think this is where he kind of is a zero accelerationist. He goes, I just think it's going to collapse before anything can happen. And once this global economic system collapses, he goes, I mean, if you're trying to move towards this inhuman Landian future, you'd have to get the system up and running again. He goes, I don't know if it would ever get up and running again the way it did. He goes, I'm just a pessimist towards this fetishism. Like, it's just magic. It's just, oh yeah, we pop the keg on the outside, and now the outside just going to rush in no matter what. He goes, no, what if we're all fucking dead, or scattered, or whatever?
Well, the notion of collapse, I think the UK especially, I mean, it has. We just not as extreme, that cartoon of two people sat around the campfire and they say, for a long time there, we were making good money for the stakeholders, and they're sat in like an apocalyptic wasteland. We're sort of in that, though. I think one of the things that we don't realize about the world outside is we have, unlike maybe previous times in history, we have enough nice. There is a prior material abundance which allows us a comfort, which previously wouldn't have been there before. So, like, when things are cascading outside, we still have a lot of fairly robust tech and very nice things, and everything's very clean and blah 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 that do last a while. So we're sat amidst it. But as far as I'm concerned, the UK pretty much has by key metrics. But we're talking about collapse. I know you guys wanted to talk about land more than
one of the things I really know what I liked about your I don't know if you'd want to call it a manifesto, but your paper on zero accelerationism, this idea of hyper collapse. And you didn't mention them, but the way I was reading what you were saying is the reason why we don't have like a kind of direct experience of this macro process of collapse is it almost has like a Baudrillardian mechanism built into it, which is our everyday life simulates things are either stable or remaining the same. And so we live in this hyper reality of safety and stability, which obfuscates this greater ongoing process of decay or collapse. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's like Wile E. Coyote when he runs off the cliff, and then we're in that bit there and he's spinning his legs, and then he looks down, right? And there has to be a point where you go, oh man, like this, and that point for the UK, I mean, I'll give an example again. For the UK, it's like, you know, at what point do you say, let's say you have an ambulance service, right? 30-minute wait. Yeah, we've got an ambulance service. 2-hour wait. Yeah, we've got an ambulance service. 10 hours? I mean, the average wait for an ambulance in the UK now is like well over 12 hours. Do you have an ambulance service at that point? And the average court trial date for things to go to court in the UK is now 2.5 years. Most people can't get a dentist, right? So at what point do you say, do we have... And for me, it's like you could say you've collapsed and you go, actually, we can't rely on an ambulance anymore. So that, so, and I'm sort of, I shouldn't be smiling about it, but it's just the state that the UK is in is very bad. But to talk about your point with zero accelerationism and the simulacrum is up for me, is upheld by, so you could say, what's the difference between zero accelerationism and collapse? If things collapse all the time, if a building collapses, you build it down and then you go, in time, this wooden structure will collapse. It has that natural inbuilt element. The key difference for me is that we do have this strange intelligence of capitalism that as far as we're aware, the entire agency and purpose of it is, I just need to get bigger, be more, grow, right? It's like, I'm going that way. You implement me into any system and the point is profit at any expense is just growth. So you have that amidst finite resources. Whereas before, I think there may be something like more Burkean, more like capitalism doesn't go, let's think about any other avenue. It's all about efficiency, profit, as we know, at the expense of every other variable in existence. Let's burn down the rainforest, or whatever, you cut down this whole forest, et cetera, et cetera. We can just grow it back or whatever it might be. So there's never any of these questions as far as I could see. And that's the distinct thing is you may think you live in some rational world where, oh, look, that thing's about to fall down. Shall we mitigate it? And then, we can have a smooth crash. Whereas capitalism would be on the crashing plane being like, what time are we getting there? You know, like still ordering drinks or whatever. Yeah.
No, I mean, and the other thing, so, I like what you said, because I think you got to the heart of like, okay, what's the issue with right accelerationism? Well, it's kind of what we've been talking about, which is, oh, we're just going to keep doing neoliberal marketization until the singularity gets here. And your point is, yeah, what if you kill
What if we don't?
yeah, exactly, right. And then
is neoliberalism just capitalism? Is that the same thing?
I think,
Yeah, it is.
You know what I mean? Like this whole weird political thing is like, I don't know. I'm not complaining about what many people complain about wokedom, but it's like, it's almost a hyper tolerance, just like whatever, as long as things just keep, there's just no, I don't know, man, no friction anywhere. It seems it's just happening.
No, and so yeah, I mean, you get that on the right with the just and with neoliberal. I mean, Slavoj has gone out of his way to always say, he goes, you notice I never talk about neoliberalism because neoliberalism is just capital being capital.
Yeah.
But no, go ahead, Dave.
It's a word people use when they are coming at things from the standpoint of, oh, we want a new deal. We want a new social democratic deal. So like they're just thinking within the frame, and they're just like, oh, there's social democracy and then there's neoliberalism. And of course, like both are capitalist realist. It's just that one is like, like, oh, but hey, it doesn't have to be so bad. And the other one's like, well, it kind of does. Because otherwise everything's going to be really expensive. And so you're still punishing poor people. You can't really get out of it. And so you got one that's like a realist and one that's like, no, but we want to be nice though. And it's like, but I just see that when it's in sociology, especially, it's just like neoliberalism. And it's just like, guys, you're just talking about capitalism and you just want social democracy. But I mean, and I would like it too. I would like to see, if for instance, Amazon were to pay taxes for the roads that it drives on, I'd love that. But I don't care. I mean, ultimately, that's not my project. It's like, that would be cool. But I mean, so would $1 million. Like someone want to give me $1 million. I mean, I feel like that's what we're talking about when we get into political conversations. It's like, yeah, I'd like all kinds of things. Who cares? Whatever. Let's go on to the next thing, because we're not going to get it anytime soon. And it is like we are in this trap. But I guess the thing I'm interested in here, like, so I brought up asteroid mining. I thought that we landed on asteroids like 10 years ago. I guess I don't really keep up with it, but there's constantly things that are, it's like, we're surprised. Like, I don't know, we were talking about, we haven't talked about hyperstition, but in terms of, the stories that they used to tell children about, like, oh, look, it's a talking mirror that you could look into. Well, no one ever thought that would be possible when they were telling that story. And now we've all got them in our pockets. Like, that's it's like everyone knows this. It's like kind of like we live in this impossible world. Your point is like this impossible world, probably not possible for much longer. And I think it could just as well be the case that it goes on for another 1,000 years and we're just going to be saying that,
collapse takes a long time. I think probably the most annoying thing that I think, I mean, once again, these are huge swathes of time that that are very quickly putting a stamp on and saying, but one thing I would say is I think big things will basically just be as they are for at least the next 80 years, right? Our lives are going to be like this sort of like light gray IKEA furniture neoliberalism future for 80 years because we've still got enough. Even John Michael Greer, who's the old collapse guy, he would say you still got about another 80 to 100 years of this. These things take time. So one thing I just want to throw in, because I would love your guys' opinion on it, because I think this is going, like, I think it's an unavoidable in some sense, and I just can't see how we can avoid it, even with the AI that we have, which is UBI. And like ChatGPT is not close to being the singularity, but it does appear to be damn close to being able to automate at least one area of jobs, right? Like at least one, like accountancy, right? Like for me, it's like, you telling me that AI can't automate bookkeeping yet? Like, we're not that close. And that's millions of jobs, right? That any sensible, capitalism-loving, vampirically infected company would go, oh, wait, I can pay $20 a month for this AI service and get rid of my, $2,000 a month staff member? Yeah, I'll do that. And for me, it's like UBI is like, there has to be some form of it at some point. Has to be. If AI is continuing on the trajectory it is, a lot of people are going to be out of work because that's just how it's economically going to work. And economists would say that I'm abiding by the broken window or the automation paradox, right? Like, if thus far it has been proven that automation does not take jobs, right? It creates more jobs. But is there a point, maybe
you cross the threshold? Yeah.
Yeah, like, is there a point you go, okay, like, supposedly you've automated, was it an automated checkout automates, like, on average, what would be 4 to 8 workers or something out of a supermarket? Yeah, that's something. But what about one company that is run by 20 people that has automated 1 million bookkeepers out of a job? Like, at what point does the meta technological level just like, we cannot keep up with this? And empirically speaking, where does the money come from, right? Like, whose economic burden is that need for these people have not got jobs anymore?
See, and this is where Cernicek and Williams continue influence. Like, I defend UBI. I think Dave's more skeptical about it. There's people in our circle that are skeptical about it. But I guess for me, on the one hand, like, okay, when Cernicek and Williams talk about algorithmic communism, they're just talking about software that's good enough to run these types of, dynamics we're talking about: counting, distribution of money, material good registration. Oh, this part of the world needs this. If there's an automatic or automated distribution network, you get into that stuff and you're like, I think we have the tech to kind of pull this stuff off, or at least start experimenting with it. And then to your point, I mean, this is something Marx understood. He's like, look, automation is baked into capitalist mode of production, in the sense that the capitalists have to compete with each other. The only way to get the upper hand in the market is to make your production process more efficient, cheaper than your competitors. So you get the market share, you get the majority of the money, you can outcompete them. Okay, but every time one capitalist revolutionizes their means of production, the other capitalists figure out what they did and they do it. So now you're back at square one. So somebody now has to come along and automate more. And yeah, like you're talking about these types of macro dynamics, they're not worked out in a week's time. It takes decades, even centuries, for this shit to hit its limit point. But that's what Marx was talking about. He's like, okay, if every capitalist is automating their production process as much as they can to outcompete other capitalists, first off, that's a structural dynamic. You're not getting rid of that. That's baked into capitalist competition. And two, as you automate your means of production, you're laying off more and more people. Well, then the problem is, to undo the wage labor is to undo the consumer, who buys all the shit you guys are making as you automate more and more. And so some people think the logic is, at some point, the capitalists are going to be the ones begging the state to give people UBI. Give them a way to buy the shit that we're trying to sell to them. And so this is one of these, and I maybe this gets us to cybernetics versus dialectics, but the Marxist dialectical interpretation of capitalism involves pinpointing all of these intrinsic antagonisms or contradictions built into the system that at some point they're going to become so pressurized, they're going to burst the system. Now, obviously, there's a kind of satirical way Marxists count on these contradictions, like, oh, the system's just going to break itself down at some point. Yeah, that's a convenient faith, I guess. But I do see how that type of contradiction in particular is a real issue, dialectically speaking, for capital. Like, its own negation is baked into it. But I also don't deny that capital itself, MCM prime, is this cyber positive process. And so I've heard you say you don't like dialectics. I know Land hates dialectics. How do you understand this distinction between cybernetics and dialectics?
Would you say dialectics presupposes a linearity? I mean, communism seems to presuppose, Marx presupposes a linearity, because speaking to some people the other day, actually, one of them said, well, as far as they can see, that, communism is right on time, right? And they couldn't understand the idea of a lot of left with political groups, demanding revolution, because reading Marx, we're right where we should be, right? That eventually capitalism breaks or transforms and evolves into communism, and that's just part and parcel of it. I mean, where cybernetics versus dialectics is an extremely abstract question.
Let me just say this for more context. So this is where we get into this thing, like, if we mean dialectics in just a kind of textbook Marxist way, I think you're right. I think it's this linear process of progressive development. But the way Žižek, what he does with it, I mean, he's doing this Lacanian Hegelian thing. And so retroactivity is baked into dialectics for Žižek. Like, first off, it's not like you have two things and they collide and then there's a synthesis out of the thesis antithesis. For him, dialectics is looking at one thing and seeing how it itself is contradictory, and that whatever it's hoping to achieve or, establish, inside of it is a counter tendency that's undermining it. And so, I mean, a basic example is from Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, where the first chapter is sense certainty. And ultimately what the subject, or whoever you want to say is the observer here, what it's trying to do is know something with absolute certainty. And the presupposition starting off is, okay, truth has to be sense certainty, which is to know a thing truly and properly is to know it in its singularity. And so, but epistemologically, you can't know a thing unless you can articulate it in language in a shared community with other people. Otherwise, what are we talking about? Knowledge is something objective where you can communicate it. So the second you want to say, get at the singularity of the thing, you go this, right? But the dialectical split in sense certainty itself is, wait a second, this though is the most universal thing you could possibly say. It's the least singular. You're trying to name the singular, but in doing so, you're naming the universal, because this is what you say of everything. This, right? And same thing goes with time. If you go now, well, every moment of time is a now, therefore you're only saying the most universal of things. And so what sense certainty realizes at the end retroactively about itself is, the very thing I took myself to be, I'm the opposite of, and this doesn't work. And so now I have to posit a new way of viewing things to get. But
we never posit. We fall to the. Well, I'll bring it back to you're talking about Lacan and the retroactive, and contradiction. To begin that, your understanding of Žižekian dialectics starting to sound like a conference. We're getting there. Big word.
Right.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. When I was speaking to Todd McGowan, who I know you guys have chatted to quite a few times, he understands that via Lacanian psychoanalysis that you only ever really get to the point of noticing, right? So like I gave the example of myself. I have a really sweet tooth, and I'm usually trying to keep off a few pounds, which I tend to fail to do. But here's the thing. I can be like really conscious and be like, yeah, man, right. You're going to go to the shop and you're just going to buy the broccoli and the chicken and the rice, right? And then I'll get to the counter and I'll be like, man, they put all the stuff there. And I'll grab the bag of Haribo, which I love. And I will know the whole time, like I'm picking it up and taking it to the till. I'm like, like the whole thing is about you not doing this. And there isn't really excuses or really anything. There's this weird retroactive, like acknowledgement of the problem itself.
The drive.
That's as far as, acknowledgement of the drive, acknowledgement of your own oversight, acknowledgement of like maybe even your neuroses, acknowledgement of the thing that you've spent months trying to drill down. You're like, it's like, I don't know, to give a really basic example, it's like every day you get up and I don't know, someone like just randomly kicks their foot into the wall, right? It's like right before that they go, right, well, I'm about to kick my foot into the wall, like, and you know you're about to do it, but you still do. And Todd McGowan would say, like, the furthest we can get is just that acknowledgement. Then that takes a lot of work to get to the acknowledgement. You see this with capitalism, right? Like, yep, we're burning down the world. Like,
yeah, and I get
this is the question on everyone's mind. Is like we all are acknowledging 1,001 things that are like, yep, I'm doing this thing. And what is it about the pushing? I guess like the breaking through, the actual transformation. Is that really a possibility? So I don't know. I mean, that's like it's very pessimistic dialectics.
No, it's interesting. What you're saying brings us to this ongoing question because look, we're on the let me just speak for myself. I'm more on the Keynesian side of things, which always is putting me at odds with the Luso-Guattarians. And but at the same time, I'm deeply inspired by the whole accelerationist thing. So I also have my love for D&G in certain ways, and part of it is like when it comes to desire. I mean, look, for me, I think actually existing desire is all the desire there is. I guess that's I don't buy this type of desiring production beneath all of our neurotic desire, and so it gets complicated. Like what do I, how do I sort through this? But I will say this, that I don't think interpretation, because this is where so should we interpret our desire into something new, or should we experiment our desire into something new? And schizoanalysis is more about this type of experimentation, making new connections, trying things out. And there's something to me that I think works in that, right? I think that the drive, like, okay, I've always said my drive got hooked on philosophy, right? But if I had the ability to experiment with different things, drive also for Lacan means drift. And so there is a weird thing where our libidinal economies can get hooked on a certain way of undermining ourselves. But if you make different connections to different activities, different passions, different pursuits, your libidinal economy can drift. I mean, the very fact that mine got hooked on philosophy when I was in my early 20s also presupposes that it wasn't hooked on philosophy for the first 20 years of my life. And so I think that's part of the issue, is that what a job-centric society, what wage labor locks us into, is being completely stultified in our ability to experiment with different forms of life. And so that's
it's not even, sorry to stop you there. I mean, I've written about this a lot, and it's when you see it, and I still struggle to conceptualize it, but it's not just that it stops us from other ways of life. It stops you even having the faculties to be able to see what such ways of life would be. That's the key difference is when you talk about, like, when von Neumann talks about game theory, he's like, you've always got to throw a random factor into the game, right? That just has to be. And it's like, we haven't got one. We never had one, and no one would even know what it looks like. And yeah, I mean, it's sort of a terrifying thought.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to throw a comment in there that this whole Lacan anti-Oedipus thing, I don't know if I agree with it. I don't know, maybe you guys.
The program will resume shortly, right after this DIY commercial that is not for any sponsor other than ourselves. Thank you for watching.
Whether we are already fully in the grip of the techno-capital AI singularity or not, we likely feel as though there's not much we can do.
As allies of future generations, we aren't giving up so easily.
To quote the author of Manifesto, the Mad Farmer Liberation Front, we wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what our life and our children's lives may be.
This fear is not new. The question of technology, media, and institutions became unavoidable in the 20th century. Yet when we think of institutions, the most radical critiques people have encountered came from either Michel Foucault or Jürgen Habermas. These thinkers towered over the theory scene in the 1970s and 80s as radicals took their long march through the institutions.
When it comes to theories of social change, the tendency is to put our hopes in leaving the existing institutions, the current order failing, or some overnight revolution to bring us salvation. Otherwise, we lean in and do the best we can with what's afforded by the existing institutions. Reform or revolution. Nothing ever changes, so we keep putting our hopes in education.
So progressives say, if only more people had access to better education, then that would solve the problems. But they have not thought seriously enough about the nature of our institutions, or this thing called education that they offer.
The most radical critiques of schooling that teachers encounter issue from Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, and Henry Giraud, but none of these ever got to the root of institutions themselves. The theorist who did this was Ivan Illich.
Gaining brief stardom in the 70s, Ivan Illich was the father of the deschooling movement, inspiring hundreds of radical schools and generations of homeschooling parents. But this characterization of his work as the anti-school guy was his ultimate demise, for that only takes account of a surface level of his work. Illich was immediately misunderstood and quickly abandoned.
The issue goes far beyond schools. We spend our entire lives mediated through institutions that totalize, instrumentalize, and reduce humans, all of our possibilities, to something predictable, calculable, and exchangeable, easy to control. The interests of state and capital here overlap entirely. Our desires are thus turned into commodities and our time energy into labor power. Illich doesn't stop here, though, for institutions are not the whole picture.
When people think of schooling today, they think of studying for exams, not learning for the sake of learning. When people think of hospitals, they think of treating illnesses, not human-to-human care and well-being. When people think of transportation, they think of speed and efficiency, not the possibility of sustained, regular, and meaningful connections. When people think of reading, they think of collecting information, not lingering with an idea. The move from schooling to schooling requires serious inquiry into the conditions of possibility for this mode.
I'm calling for a sincere and earnest revival of Illich. While most introductions to Illich limit their engagement to his earlier works, a series of polemics against schooling and institutionalized consumer society, I want to go deeper and lead us to a more robust understanding of who and what a human is for Illich. With his help, we will reopen the question of what we are, what we can be, and the types of lives we are willing to give our time and energy to bring into being, if there are to be humans in the future.
This course begins on June 13th and goes through July 4th, 2024. It meets on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can enroll at theoryunderground.com/courses/Illich-1. Or just click on the link in the description.
Thank you.
We hope to see you there.
And yeah, I mean, it's sort of a terrifying thought.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to throw a comment in there that this whole Lacan anti-Oedipus thing, I don't know if I agree with it. I don't know, maybe you guys don't either, but like, there, the whole thing that Lacan, banned that book. I mean, I think that was really just his ego, because reading it, it's like, this isn't really that anti-Lacan. I think ultimately, actually, more than any text, for the last, any famous text, that's bolstered Freud more than, it's tethered to Freud at every turn. It's anti, it's literally called anti-Oedipus, for God's sake. It's like postmodern, postmodernism. It's like, you absolutely love modernism. You're on about it all the time.
Yeah.
That's what your whole thing is. So,
we just read Freud's essay on negation in the course at Theory Underground, called The Clinical Structures of Psychoanalysis and Autism with Leon Brenner. And I'd never read it before, and it's just like, it's a classic piece, but it's just kind of, the takeaway is just like, if somebody says, oh, well, I had this dream and blah, 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 blah. It wasn't my mother. Like that. It's like, well, first of all, I do agree with you about this one idea. Like, I'm sympathetic to the analyst and in that situation who's just sick of Freud, like always doing this. But when someone feels the need to like really, it's not this though. It's like, well, maybe it is though. Did you ever think that it might be? And it's just like you're anti-Oedipus, and it's like, oh, it's like, oh, we're anti-psychoanalysis. Really? It's kind of very psychoanalytic, actually. And so it's like Freudian negation, actually reading the title through that, I think you could take it as a sort of affirmation, you know?
Mm. Yeah. No. I'm with you. But I mean, the question that was going through my mind is like, you know, if really what we're talking about is like anti-authority figure, right? Like having that sometimes angsty, like it's not that. And I don't want, you know, I'm going to break things apart. How can you have that without falling into the, you know, the angsty side of
well,
things.
That's what Lacan's little quip was about to his Maoist students, which is, you know, his whole thing, how'd it go? The thing about, you say you want a new master, don't worry, you'll get one. I'm paraphrasing. But his whole point is like, okay, when you're occupying this hysterical position of all you do is challenge authority figures, all you do is challenge paternal authority at a full authority. What you don't realize is that you're fully invested in that authority. You're getting your enjoyment from resisting that authority. Therefore, you're going to unconsciously reproduce the authority.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like preparing to do some. I mean, it's a completely different figure, but I think he's one of the few that really managed to do this in some positive sense, and it's probably where I'm at the most at the moment. But I'm preparing to do some talks on The Unique and Its Property by Stirner. And in doing the research for this, and people are writing about Stirner and, you know, the spirit and egoism today, what you see is you go on all these egoist forums or whatever, and they're like, yeah, we're going to shoplift. Like, and it's like, it's exactly this, right? It's like they found what Stirner would call a spook or spirit or an idol. And they're like, that sucks. And they do the antithesis instead of what Stirner would say is like, you know, completely take it right back and become the creative nothing. But yeah, I mean, it's just a very frustrating thing to say.
Horrible politics is about when he says, I would prefer not to, what he is really saying is, I would prefer not to get enjoyment from resisting you. Like I want to take myself out of this whole circuit of authority resistance. Because whether you're in the one position or the other, you are going to help reproduce this same dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, what you resist persists, and this is all we see going on with the left and the right. Is, I mean, I've joked about this so many times, right? But when I spoke about it with Todd McGowan, the online right especially exists pretty much solely from a left-wing person posits, I don't know, like we want to put this through in government, or left-wing person says this, and then it's like resist, you know, friction. And, you know, like someone like Greer or Dion Fortune would say that actually if you left that thing be, it would have just flowed off into absolute nothingness. And when I was speaking to John Michael Greer about this, he said, you know, Donald Trump, if Donald Trump hadn't had that initial, like literally howling friction against him, would Donald Trump really, would it just have been like,
no.
Do you remember that? And he flowed off into nothing. But because you had that moment of like, you know, but no one realizes that doing that bolsters both sides until they become.
I'm always trying to drive this point home to the leftists I know, which is you guys have to stop overreacting to things, because it's this logic of prohibition eroticizes. You pour gas on the fire by being hysterical in your reactions. So no, I'm totally with you on that. I mean, that's where I'm a believer in the.
But then you always get, so what? Just do nothing.
Well, and that's the thing. That's why Slavoj says, I actually think this thing of taking yourself out of the circuit, you know, and he's not saying literally do what Bartleby did, but he's saying don't fuel this cycle in any way. And to get outside of it, the do nothing thing, I think it's more of what we do. Think new ideas, try to think in alternative ways, foster a community of thought, etc. That's and think about it. I mean, what we do, your typical average person would say, you guys, philosophy is doing nothing, right? This is a way they talk about it. No. And so in this sense, I think doing nothing, that's why we call ourselves underground theory. I think this cultivation of thought, this cultivation of a background of different interpretations, different concepts, etc., is more revolutionary in the long run. It's not like anybody's going to get big credit for it or anything, because you're cultivating just a background of different forms of intelligibility. But I think in the long run, that has more potential to it than any typical form of politics I see. So I think we're all part of cultivating a new milieu of thought.
I read about this a long time ago, but what is it? The Overton window, which is a term I don't like anyway, because I think that itself is actually part and parcel of the structure that contains our thought. But that in itself, this right-left Disneyfication, where the good guys are the bad guys, red, blue, whatever. Binaries are very easy, right? I mean, that window has just tightened and tightened and tightened and tightened to the point where, like, the actual discussion that's going on in there is practically, you just like, I can't even tell the difference between either. A very clear example of this at the moment is Labour versus Tories in the UK. Like, you delve into that, you go, where is the noticeable difference in it? Yeah, it's just nothing, which is even worse in a way. But what's interesting, what we're talking about with the friction, is that engaging in that friction limits you to the arena of that friction. Like, you can't go, I want to be involved in this, but I'm sure I've got a different idea. No. We're just butting heads right now, right? Like, no one takes that seriously.
But in a weird kind of new form of black iron prison. I loved your video on Ballas, and it just seems like another prison. Once you're locked into it, it's just a eternal return of the same, just every day, And so I don't know. Again, that's why I think doing nothing is more. There's more potential in that.
Except we have to work, and so we still have to work.
There's one thing I just want to say, because this is kind of the core thing I want to talk to James. Just this. So I guess, look, my critique of Land would be, look, dude, and maybe if he saw this, maybe it would piss him off. I don't like, he would Mr. Piss off everybody at work. So Nick, if you ever see it, just, okay, you pissed everybody off. Maybe I'll piss you off with this. I just don't get the impression Nick ever had to work like in the way that Dave and like the incredible structural stultification that a shitty job in wage labor does to a person. You can call me a transcendental miserablist, and I'm just depressed and I hate everything that's capital. But I want to go, until you had to work years of your life in a job that barely gives you enough to get by and prevents you from pursuing the things that you find to be passionate, that would make you want to get out of bed in the morning, where your creativity is completely stifled, your ability to, foster your mind, the life of the mind, and that you're not going to have any retirement, that there's no social institutions to go to for help. I just think Land, and maybe I'm doing like a class privilege thing, but I never got the impression he's ever faced any of the issues of why some of us hate the everyday reality of capitalism. And I think it's convenient to just, it's Lovecraftian nightmare, great, accelerate it. I don't want to go, dude, like, we can't go to the dentist. We can't, we can't go to the
my tooth.
Yeah.
No, but I've been in that, I've been in that situation. I was in retail for a long time. And then I remember doing 10.5-hour days as a carpenter, kind of like caked in sawdust and sweat, like exhausted. And I remember, like, I've joked about this on one of my episodes before. Like, it was one of my really searing hatred of Heidegger. I mean, outside of him being a Nazi, which is like, hate him enough for that. But his whole, like, like craft and fetishization of tools, right? I'm like, dude, you have never fucking sanded a single door for like an hour in your life, when you're going to go home and be so tired that you don't even get an evening right to yourself. So you like, and there's a distinct, like, there's something, the belt sander was ready at hand. No, the belt sander was really good actually, because otherwise I would have been, so yeah, no, I don't know. But I don't want to comment on Lance. I don't know enough about it. So
why I just
but I think the point still stands. Is it's all well and good, like, yeah, man, the science, the science fiction accelerationist, but in the sense of like, but that's the next 80 years, and you're denying the reality of a corporeal human being with 1,001 facets of. You're denying the point up till that is just nothing, which is, it's kind of a boring position to hold, I think.
Well, James, I mean, look, he said it straightforward in his interview with Justin Murphy. He goes, I have no interest in emancipating any humans, any groups, etc. I only care about the emancipation of capital. He says it straight up. And so when people tell me, oh, Lynn doesn't just hate people and want us to die, I want to go, well, on a concrete material thing, if you don't care about old people being able to afford medical care, if you don't care, you do want us to fucking die. And you do change.
Well, I don't think it's an active hatred though. It's just not a
fine. That's fine.
But it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous position though. It's because the theory is untenable with empirical reality. So up until that point, and also there's just an extent of like to what
Yeah, I don't have this impression that he's
Nick. You're gonna get backache.
Right, yeah, and that's the thing. I've never thought he's literally sitting around every day. I hate humans. I want them all to fucking die. No, I never. No. But the evil or the hatred is just in his complete indifference to whatever.
Well, I don't think it's evil and hatred at that point. I don't. This whole joke about when he says, "I'm not a racist. I'm a hyper racist." Right? Like on the theory level, it's just an absolute. Like the human race is not as we. There is. When you get to that point of the conception of human from the point of view of the Landian capital, there is nothing human in that human. It's just a pure resource, which I think is a very interesting way to look at and philosophize about the end game of capitalism. Absolutely. But, my point with Zedek and what we would say is like this, we're not going away like anytime soon. And it's ridiculous to completely ignore that.
But yeah, I guess, and that's, the famous leftist critique of land is just, dude, you read D&G, like they're just going on and on about deterritorialization. You don't ever say anything about the new Earth, which was them saying we're going to go to a post-capitalist mode of production or plane of existence or whatever. So we leave capital behind, according to them, on the new Earth. He doesn't reckon with that really. And then the whole thing of he turns capital just into deterritorialization, leaves aside reterritorialization, and this idea that, capital just hates stable states or steady states. And I want to go, dude, there's this way that capital does deterritorialize and all this. I'm not denying that. It's true. But the very fact, here's what it reterritorializes. It keeps us as wage laborers. That doesn't go away. You talk about a steady state in capital, it's wage labor, commodification, reification.
And that doesn't even make sense by Land's theory, right? Because we've already seen that, for instance, if the whole point is efficiency and et cetera, it seems to me that there is, for instance, I mean, it's sort of a joke, but it's also a truth about the class appreciation of the first things that were automated, right? If you still think about automation and computing power and what we do with computers, which is largely quantification and to do with numbers, you think, okay, the first thing we'll automate. I always give the example of bookkeeping because to me it's like money comes in, money goes out, and maybe there's some categories that it has to go in, and then but it does not seem complicated for a piece of automated software to do that. But the class appreciation of this is, in terms of popularity and technological appeal, what was the first things we automated? Trucks. Like 18-wheeler trucks were some of the first things that we privately automated. And it's like, wait, what does he make? That makes no sense in terms of Land's theory of capital. And this is where I think the human element is like, why? Like it doesn't, why was that decision made? And the things that are slowly getting automated, They do seem to have class elements, even though I'm not a Marxist, but there are class elements to them. And what's making those decisions? Something is like holding back. People are we see with the whole thing with not wanting to give fully over to remote work, which even has mass evidence that it's far more efficient, there's still that huge human element of, no, we kind of just, of all the reasons for being against remote work, the one that seems to be true is people just like to keep an eye and make sure that people are pretending to be busy, right? Like there is pretty much zero defense I can find for not going to remote work if you can't. And the only thing would be if the employee wants to go into the office, which some people might want to if they're completely brain fried or whatever. But if we're talking on the level of efficiency, like no. So yeah.
No, it's like we have this. This is Todd's point. This is Žižek's point, and partly my point, because I'm in this specific way. I'm following in their footsteps, but that's what's going on with us. You can't ever actually turn us into perfect puppets because we're split. We have this inherent split between what we're purposely trying to accomplish and this unconscious detour that is derailing us in what we're trying to accomplish. And so this is where there's enjoyment in being irrational, enjoyment in making rash decisions, all this stuff. And since we are still part of the system, that's going to get in capital's way, and if we do it in this kind of stone cold, logical, plotting way, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's where, in a weird sense, our death drive is a kind of counter agency, which I know he would want to say we don't have any agency anymore, but it sure seems like we're still getting in the system's way, even if it's in ways like we would like to say, oh, we're doing it in our political movements or whatever. Doesn't seem to be there. It's in these other kind of behind the scenes ways. But and the only last point I would make on this, on the reterritorialization thing, the thing is, even with DNG, capital is this great revolutionizing moment because it ushers in deterritorialization, trafficking with the outside, etc. But just like I said, okay, but it reterritorializes us as wage laborers, and that's a dynamic that just constantly remains stable throughout capitalism. On a deeper level, there's a deeper thing that it doesn't change, which is, I don't care if we're talking about tribal society, up to feudalism, up to capitalism, human beings have always had to face necessary labor. There's necessary labor to reproduce ourselves, and capitalism has not gotten rid of necessary labor. It's been a stable state in all of these various forms of society. And so when we talk about time energy, my whole thing is, you really want to usher in the outside, figure out a system that unlocks universal time energy, which is to say, human beings get access to the majority of their time and energy to devote to the passions and the wellspring of creativity that's there. Now, I know people could go, well, that's utopianism. Fair enough. I'm not saying we all get our universal time energy tomorrow, but if I want to believe,
but it's not binary, right? Though, sorry to interrupt you, but it's people just go, oh, like binary, like, right, tomorrow this thing is implemented, and now, right? It's like, well, what about we all only have to work 20 hours a week, right? Like, no, like,
yeah, and that's the idea. Is like, for us, it would be like, look, I'm completely like, I've opted out of actually existing politics. I'm disillusioned, right? But I ask myself, like, almost a hyperstitional question: what type of politics would have to exist for me to be fully invested in it? It would be a politics oriented around time energy and universal time energy, which is to say, this is the thing, and this is the kind of influence of Žižek and McGowan. A universal politics is one based around a universal lack. I don't care if you're black, white, cis, trans, gay, straight, Lemite, Christian, atheist, it doesn't matter. What we all, generally speaking, lack is our time energy. And that would be the core difference. And I really think like that, we want to talk about ushering in the outside. What happens if all of us are capable of individually and communally pulling our creativity into circuits with one another? That to me that ushers in an outside on the basis of truly the real deterritorialization, which is finally deterritorializing ourselves off of necessary labor through automation. And my challenge to Nick would just be like, Nick, okay, You want capital to keep doing its thing. You want this process to go. Then have capital deterritorialize us off of wage labor. Have capital itself abolish wage labor and work as much as look, I think it's good for us to work a day a week or something. So we have some sense of like, no, this whole system still has to be reproduced on some level. I can only pursue my passions because there's this communal structure in place for me to do whatever I'm doing individually. So I have an indebtedness to it. And I think that day of work, this is like the reverse Sabbath, right? The day of work opposed to the day of rest. But this Sabbath day would be to remind us that this isn't just the way it is. Like there's a history that brought us to this point, sacrifices that brought us to this point. We can only pursue our individual life passions on the basis of that. And so the day is a reminder of that. But point is,
dude, this is the first time I've been talking to Mikey for 10 years. This is the first time he said that I'm aware of. The reverse Sabbath is the coolest idea you've said yet. That's awesome.
It's going to be in the book. Like I'm revising
a day of reminder for those that fell during the wage labor years.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's my thing is like, Nick, okay, I've heard him talk about the plasticity of labor power, all of this. I'm like, all right, if capitalism is how we get our time energy, then accelerate the process, I guess. But I don't.
But we're not.
Right.
But we're not.
So that's the question is how to build a politics that could actually have any sort of, I guess, a negative feedback quality to it that could meaningfully challenge the process. And at the same time, I know that the accusation, look, I'm inspired by left accelerationists, and I get the critique of us is you guys want to have your cake and eat it too. You want the technological dynamic. This is what he says in the Critique of Transcendental Miserableism. You guys want the technological dynamism and innovation that capital spurs on, but you don't want all the other stuff. And I want to go, yeah, I kind of do. And I know that there's these utopian visions of hyper productivity in a communist society, et cetera. And I don't want to focus on this. Like, for me, like, yes, it's great to have these visions, right? The focus though has to be, what can we actually do to practically begin to even hyperstition our way towards anything like that type of future? But those small steps, to me, that's where my political investment would lie. I think whatever baby steps those are more important long term than whatever is going on with actually existing politics.
I have a quick little point of order before we continue, and that's that this, let's see. So I've got someone coming over in about 10 minutes, and then we'll have to do some stuff. I could probably push it like 15 if we needed to in our closing statements, but I want to just make sure everyone gets their time to kind of wrap up any sort of threads that they're running with or close out any tabs. I like that metaphor. I just wanted to say a couple of things, though, to set you both up. And Mikey, you'll have to plug your book because it's coming out in like June, right? And anyway, so, and also, James, I hope that you'll say some things for my people, just in terms of like ways that they can check out your stuff and things that you're working on in terms of your writing and everything like that people will want to check out. But before, I guess my big thing that I think takes most of the threads and kind of pulls it together, bringing it back to the whiteboard behind me with the, what we have CMC minus MCM prime, and then it's got time, energy, money, and then T cubed. And
the symbol with the E and the line through it, that's the time energy.
Okay.
As we call it.
Yeah, it's right here on my arm. And it's actually in the theory fiction piece that's going to be at the end of Mikey's book, which I don't think you see that in the edition you currently have. But all of that's to say, is there a way to say, okay, it's not just one circuit that just does the same thing forever, causing this one big spiral? Is there a way to, through intellectual or conceptual, but practice-based differentiation and lines of demarcation or distinction to develop a split and actually like cause some of that to go in some other direction that causes something else to become more efficient or effective in a different sense than the sense that it is being used in the circuit of MCM prime. And so all I want to say on that is that this intelligence thing, just when I'm thinking land, it's like his basic thing is I would say it's kind of like this Jeremy Bentham kind of flattening of all things into it's just inputs, outputs, it's just pleasure, pain, and it's like Bentham and Mill have this disagreement over, kinds of pleasure, right? Because for Bentham, it's just all the same, and he says, if you get pleasure from collecting push pins, then awesome, and if you get pleasure from whatever, it's just pleasure's pleasure, and then of course the question is how to have the most pleasure for the most people. My worldview has nothing to do with pleasure or any kind of normal sense for happiness, because I don't know that we really know what happiness can be. But what most people think happiness is, I don't care. I don't want it. And, it's not interesting to me. I want people to have good lives, but most people want to have comfortable lives, and comfortable lives aren't good lives. And so there's just like these things that have to be distinguished. And I think one of the big ones is just like the kind of, it's not a pleasure, but like the kind of thing you get from doing something meaningful that does require delayed gratification, as opposed to the kind of thing you get from like, oh, I bought a book that felt good, right? It's like the difference between like you bought the book and that felt good versus like, oh no, but you've actually put like your life towards like understanding this field, and now you've situated within that. Now you're revisiting that book 10 years later, and on that other side, that requires time energy, which when I have the T cubed up there, it's like the time energy, talent, and tutelage, right? We need these three things, right? And so Benjamin Studebaker just gave this wonderful lecture at Theory Underground where he's talking about the three T's, and now we're running with that because it's a more succinct way of saying something that I've been trying to say in all of my work over the last like 7 years. He said it better. And so the tutelage aspect is like to say, it's one thing to have relative time and energy freed up as an individual. It's another thing to actually explore and discover talents and then develop those with tutelage. And then that requires some kind of institutional structures, because tutors, really teachers, people who are passionate about fields like you are, or like we are, we got to be able to do this thing. And traditionally, that's what the university was supposed to be about. Traditionally, that's also what, wealthy patrons paid tutors to do, like Epictetus, for instance, right? And so all that's to say is I think that the flattening effect that's like Bentham that land brings to everything is just like, oh, if it gets better, then it's capital. And it's like, I don't know, man. I think that there might be something else here that we're trying to get at. And so I guess I want your thoughts on that. And I want to like let you both have your closing statements. The last thing I'll say is that UBI versus PBI, man, we're being sold the idea of UBI, but all we're ever going to get is PBI, which is particularist, basic incomes, and they'll never keep up with inflation and rents. And a good example of PBI is like in Oakland during 2020, only black people got, they called it like a UBI. They're like, oh, black people are getting a UBI. So, well, guess what? That's a particularist basic income. That's not a universal one, because obviously there's some poor white person who's like out there suffering too and is like, I don't get something. What? And the point of like this means tested kind of thing is it's about the long game of just ultimately keeping people gerrymandered into certain constituencies. It's about keeping the existing political thing going off of gerrymandering. And I'm using gerrymandering in a sort of metaphorical sense, not like the strict sense here, which is just to say we're all carved up. And so this, I think you're right, that this 1,000 years of decline, we're going to see just, this kind of like a niche particular, carving up of the populace against one another, and it scares me, and I think and they'll all get off, like the handful of people will get off planet like Wally, and the rest of us will be left behind in Mad Max world. And I don't want to be in Mad Max world. If anything, please take me with you on the Wally world. I'm not going to get taken. They'll leave me behind and they'll laugh on their way. So that's where I'm coming from. That's what I'm thinking about. And I'd love to get coffee with you and hang out, or you can come to the pub with us when we're in London next month. So I'm sharing in the chat here the poster, so you can check that out for the various events that we'll be doing on our tour. It's coming up shortly here. But that's all the things I wanted to say that I have here. And now I just want to hear your guys' closing thoughts. Yeah.
I'll just say briefly that, in June, we're shooting to have my first book out through Theory Underground, and it's called Capital versus Timenergy, Critical Engagement with Nick Land. And, it's an unpolished piece insofar as I was going to publish it as a blog post, and then it ended up being over 80,000 words, and Dave intervened and Todd McGowan intervened, and this madness has to stop. You can't put this out as a blog post. And so Todd convinced me, just let Dave publish it. And so we were going to try to have it out this month, but there's a couple sections in it that I'm like, okay, if I'm doing a book on land, I need to clarify what accelerationism. There's some basics that I left out of it, and then I had this idea for this small little short story, little theory fiction that I wanted to add to it. So I'm adding in a couple things. So it's going to be coming out in June. But I just if I reworked it a bit, it could be a straight up an introduction to Nick Land book. But I've got other projects I want to get to, and so it's a little messy, chaotic, rough around the edges, and that's kind of fine with us since we just self-publish. So, that should be coming out in June. And I just want to thank James for coming on. Like I said, been a big fan of your work for a long time now. It's been great to chat with you. Hope you come back on sometime in the future.
I'd love to.
And, floor is yours.
Just to say, I'd love coming on. I'd love to come back on, chat. It's been a while since I've chatted about these things in this sort of forum, and I forgot how much fun it can be. I guess the only thing you were mentioning about different, land flattens everything. Everything for him is on the same path. For me, the philosophers that I've come to love and read more and more often, and actually that form my actual worldview. So the two biggest ones are Wilhelm Reich and Klages, and both are emphatic about focus on the body. And our discussion, not in a derogatory way, has been and Land is always he is in intelligence world, right? Which is just pure abstraction. And, we're talking about what it is to suffer. The things we were talking about when you're the intuitive understanding of what it is to be a wage laborer is, my feet hurt, I need to get my tooth fixed, my hands ache. The other path, and although I want to split it in a binary way, is to get back to the body. And all of a sudden, a lot of these problems change. And Reich's a good place to start with that, especially if you're coming from the Marxist stand. So that's where I'd finish up. So get back to the body, the thing philosophy ignores, even though we all have one.
Hey, sure, but to get back to the body, should we be thinking face tentacles?
No, I don't know if we should. No, we should be thinking about no.
Healthcare that
actually,
ventral hernia.
James, it's been a pleasure, man. Next time, I'd like to.
Hey, James, I want to talk to you about.
Hey.
All right.
I want to hear all about Klages. I want you to tell me and my audience why you love Klages. And the fact is he's super underrated, not really translated. I'd love to have you back just to hear all about why he's become so formative for you.
Sure. Yeah. I'd love to do that. Yeah. And you can find, if you type in Hermitix, which is Hermitix, That's my podcast. Should come up first on Google and YouTube. If you want to find about forgotten philosophers, some that quite a lot that you'll probably never will have heard of because I didn't even hear about them before I'd done it. And obscure literature and sensible discussions on occultism that don't feel super woo-woo, then yeah, head on over. Other than that, jdemeta.net is my website. We can find links to my books and things like that. So yeah, it's been great. I'm a big fan of Theory Underground. So I want to come back.
Thank you, man. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Yeah, you too. You too.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of the bullshit and just want to get down to it. Big ideas, rigorous thinking, and ultimately liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. Besides a commitment to publishing certain underground theorists and popularizing certain fundamental concepts, we have toured the United States and are touring Europe to promote our ideas, courses, and publications. You've been reading Underground Theory.
Amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Timenergy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first, obviously, I have to get freed myself, so the two of us are able to do this because, as Mikey said, build it and they will come. Well, I tried and I built a website and platform. I had my own app and everything, but it's been really buggy and it's more than one person can handle, and that's, a really good lesson for me. And so for now, what we're doing is moving it to a temporary intermediary platform until we are able to get some more serious funding. And ultimately, we want to be in a place like this, a real brick and mortar digital nomadic mecca where people can come from all over the world. But also, the app was really expensive, and so by quitting it, I am now able to save a lot of money, and with the help of my patrons and the students at Theory Underground, especially the monthly subscribers, I am officially able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. So thank you so much, everybody. This is one huge step forward. With that said, several subscribers did not migrate from the now defunct app to the new setup, and I'm guaranteed to lose people over time. So please, if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. If you're not even sure what this is all about but are just curious, then I've added Tier 0 and Tier 1 for very basic kinds of access to what we are doing behind the scenes. If you don't have any time or energy to get involved, but you do have some money to help support this project from afar, then please check out the Patreon. My patrons over at Patreon make the podcast and public YouTube possible. Thank you. As for once-in-a-lifetime events, check out the new poster for the American Idiots Theory Underground European Book Tour. Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Vienna, Linz, Krakow, Glasgow, London, and Oxford from April 27th to May 25th, 2024. 2 events are already fully booked out. Save a seat at an event by getting in contact with us ASAP. Finally, the call for proposals to our conference in Mexico on the last weekend of October 24th through 27th is out. Establish contact if you're interested and make sure to submit the form before June 1st.